What is the scariest thing that has ever happened to you? Part 1. Please like and subscribe to support this channel. Not me, but my girlfriend before we were together. This is about 8 years ago when she was 18. Her and her family went on holiday to the United States, a sort of round trip through the country, for about a month. They went to the places you'd expect: WDC, New York, LA. They also went to San Francisco. Their usual sleep arrangement would be mom and dad in one room and my girlfriend and her brother in another. So they get to the hotel in San Francisco and settle in. My girlfriend puts on some fresh makeup. Her brother is taking a shit before going to dinner, the usual stuff. They leave the room and have a good time. Later in the evening they come back home, and my girlfriend goes to the bathroom. I shit you not, this really happened. She looks in the mirror with the shower curtain in the back and clearly sees that there is someone standing behind it. She immediately gets scared and runs from the room. These idiots call fucking room service while in the room in order to tell them there is someone in their bathroom. As opposed to running the hell away, room service tells them to not pack anything and leave immediately. Turns out a man had been in there the entire time, even when her brother had been taking a dump. Police gets involved and everything. They were never told who exactly it was, which scares me the most. But my girlfriend always checks shower curtains when we don't sleep at home. I was about 15 at the time. My father and I were driving home on the back roads of rural Georgia, and I swear to this day I saw a severed human leg on the side of the road. There was flesh on it from the foot to above the kneecap, and then it was just bone and pieces of torn flesh to the top of the femur. I of course flipped out and yelled at my dad to stop the car. By the time we stopped and I told him what I saw, we saw a beat-up pickup truck drive up. A middle-aged looking man stepped out of the truck and threw the leg in the truck bed, and then sped off. I have another story, but I've posted it on Reddit several times. When I was young, 10 to 12, my family went rustic camping in Pennsylvania. In the middle of the night, as I lay in my tiny two-person tent with only my friend, I hear heavy crunching footsteps outside. Then came the breathing. What I can only describe as a low grunting sniffing sound began getting louder. I presume what I was hearing was a bear right away, but I will never really know. The beast started circling the tent and pressing its nose against the thin fabric. I laid as still as I possibly could, even though I was shaking with fear and preparation for being eaten alive. The bear ended up laying down next to the tent with part of its body against the fabric, pressing in to the point where I had to pull my legs up so that I didn't touch it. I'm not sure if I passed out or fell asleep, but in the morning I thought it was a dream until I saw the flat spot where the leaves were cleared from the bear laying down. When I was a young teen, I was home alone one afternoon after school. We lived in a pretty good area, but the city is known for being a little rough in general. Occasionally people would hang around or pretend to sell things people knew weren't legit as an excuse for casing a house. Well, two such men were in the neighborhood that day and knocked on my door. As a 13-ish girl home alone, there was no way I could answer, but this made the house appear empty. These guys start circling the house, peer in the windows a few times. I stayed out of sight. I called a family friend around the block who worked as a correctional guard for some help. Police were the next call. He showed up pretty fast and pushed the guys off. You can guess I was pretty scared, knowing I might have to make a quick exit out of a window or back door at any moment. Well, I was home alone one afternoon, faking sick like I used to all the time in high school. It was around 3 p.m. on a Friday. I heard a knocking at the door. My brother was always way too lazy to get his keys out, but I was like, fuck that, I'm not getting the door. Then they start ringing the doorbell and I'm like, come on. Then I hear a huge bang and someone walking inside. I thought it was my mom coming back from grocery shopping, until I heard someone yelling the name Alex in an unfamiliar voice. At this point I was like, holy shit, someone has broken in. I'm sitting in my bed, which is right across from the staircase. I see him walking up the stairs and he has a crowbar in his hand. All I can say to him is, no one here is named Alex. He looks at me, says sorry miss, lol, classic Canadian home invasion, and runs out. Then I start hysterically crying. I couldn't sleep for days. And I still despise being home alone to this day. My house didn't feel like mine. It just so happened that I had had nightmares about this sort of thing since I was 9. I'm just happy nothing else happened, since at this time I was a 17-year-old girl. My wife and I had lived together for a few years and moved into a 2-level apartment. Occasionally, I started to hear a child scream. Just one scream, and definitely from inside the apartment. It would happen once every few days, and it was clearly an anguished, painful scream. Sometimes it would happen in the middle of the night, sometimes in broad daylight. I was starting to have some issues with my nerves after several weeks of this. I would always jump up and run through our apartment trying to figure out where the scream had come from. But, as it was a short scream and only once, I could never tell where the hell it was coming from. I started telling friends and family about it, because I was pretty wigged out. The screams that would happen around 4 a.m. were the worst. I was so keyed to that scream that I would jump up and run around in a desperate attempt to find the source of this pain scream. It would take me forever to get back to sleep after that. I'd just lay there with my heart pounding, waiting for another scream. I was cleaning my office one day when the scream happened in the same room with me. Scared the shit out of me. I don't frighten easily, but I'll admit I jumped like I was going to die. I look over to see that my computer screensaver was a 3D South Park Kenny floating around and getting stabbed by a spear. The sound was turned to off, but still once every few days, Kenny would scream in pain as the spear thing stabbed him. I felt like a fucking idiot, but also extremely relieved no child had been murdered in my apartment and was now haunting me. TLDR. You killed Kenny. And he haunted me. When I was maybe 8 years old, I went to stay with my grandparents for the weekend. That night I had some really intense night terrors, something I hadn't suffered from previously, or ever have since. My nana couldn't shake me out of it and I just screamed and cried out in fear for about an hour. Like real dread in my eyes. The next morning, I found out that my cousin, we were born a few days apart, who lived down the same street as my grandparents, had been sleepwalking at the same time that I had been having these nightmares. She walked out of the house, crossed a busy dual carriageway and walked a mile or so into town in her bare feet, got picked up, thankfully, by a nice couple on their way home from a club and brought her home. According to my nan, I kept saying, keep going, but she likes to sugarcoat stories so I don't actually know if that's true. Either way, it's always freaked me out that these two incidents happened on the same night at the same time with neither of us ever displaying this sort of behavior before or after. TLDR used mind control to try and kill my cousin. I was a kid when this happened. My uncle and I were finishing up chopping, gathering firewood for my grandmother because it was getting dark. Driving back on a dirt road at about 30 miles per hour, give or take 5 miles per hour, I had this awful sense of being watched. Before I could turn to look out my window, passenger side, my uncle quickly shouted, "Don't." I completely froze. My heart felt like it was beating out of my chest, then completely stopped when I heard a tap asterisk on my window. My uncle sped up and was loudly praying in my native language. I didn't know what was going on and thought it was over till our truck suddenly dipped from the bed. My uncle then started saying, "Look at me," and "Don't turn away," over and over. Then I heard it again, tap, but from the window behind me. It was getting harder for me to breathe and I wanted to cry. A minute or two passed and the truck dipped again. My uncle looked around and sighed. It was quiet besides the truck in the road. He looked at me and said, "We will ask your father to do a prayer in the morning. So the evil will forget our faces." Navajo to English equivalent. I remember curling up on the seat and just staring at the radio watching the time. Listening to my uncle sing an old prayer till we got to my grandmother's house. I used to work on an ambulance in a particularly beat-up northeastern Rust Belt city. High poverty, high crime. My partner and I got sent to a fire standby in a particularly dank part of town. While there, the fire department asked if we could take a look at someone who cut his arm. They bring over a big, and I mean fucking enormous, man who smelled of liquor. Of course we couldn't legally say he was drunk, only that he smelled of Ito. Oh, and he was slurring his speech. And he couldn't walk straight. Dude was drunk. Anyway, this guy had to be at least 6 feet 8 inches, probably pushing 300 pounds. My partner was a tough woman, and I don't consider myself a wimp, but this guy was pretty intimidating to both of us. Luckily, he was just talking about how he tried to help the firefighters and he cut his arm. Sure enough, there was a cut on his arm, but it wasn't deep enough to be anything more than a scratch. Cool, we bandaged it up and asked him which hospital he wanted to go to. While en route, I was in the back when I noticed we pulled over and were doing a 3-point turn. Curious, I popped my head up front and asked my partner what was up. She said that dispatch had directed us to return to the fire scene. Well, that's fucking odd, because I'd never, ever been directed returned to a scene while en route to a hospital. She said it was a direct order from our head supervisor, who received it as a direct order from the fire chief. She also said not to tell the big guy in the back about it. As per orders. By the way, that's not fucking horrifying to the guy stuck in back with him. A couple minutes later he catches wise, asks why we turned around. I said I don't know. We pull up to the scene and the fire truck is gone. The fire had been all but put out when we first arrived. It was pretty small. The only people left at the scene were two men in plain clothes, the fire police. They said they were doing an inspection of the fire and wanted to ask our patient a few questions. These two guys were each of decent build, probably upwards of 6 feet and about 200 pounds. So it worried me a little bit more when they asked if both my partner and I could join them in the back with this drunk hulk of a man. Over the next 20 minutes, the fire police tore this guy's story apart. They asked him what he'd been doing, and he said he'd been helping the fire department. They pointed out that his fingerprints were found inside the house, and they asked how he'd been inside when the fire department saw him approach the scene after they'd already arrived, and he never made it inside. They asked why he would rush into a burning building without any protective gear. The one guy pointed to the patient's t-shirt, a volunteer fire t-shirt from a nearby town. He stated that that volunteer group had been shut down for 5 years. The patient was getting more and more agitated. By the time the fire police outright said, "I think you started that fire," the patient had had enough. I should state that from the get-go. The guy was given the full strap into our gurney in the back of the ambulance. Harness seatbelt, shoulder straps, leg seatbelt, the works. So imagine the look on my face when he jerks forward to grab the fire police and he jostles the stretcher with him. I remember I could hear the metal on the stretcher screech as he pulled against it. The second fire policeman grabbed his partner to pull him out. The fire policeman that was grabbed pried at the big guy's hand to break his grip. I basically opened the side door behind me and more or less threw my partner out of the back, which she later told me she didn't exactly appreciate. I had it in my mind that I really wanted to help break the big man's grip on the fire police, but I also really wanted to get the hell out of there. Luckily I didn't have to be brave, nor fail at being brave and then lie about it on Reddit, because the fire police managed to break the big man's grip and the two of them tumbled backward and out the back door, which they had left open when they climbed in. So now I'm the last one in back with this big, angry, drunk pyromaniac who had just set fire to a house and was confronted by the fire police. Oh boy. He, in his inebriated state, was trying to undo the seat belts and was thrashing backward to grab me. I was frozen stupid at this point and stayed out of reach, but didn't have the wherewithal to jump out the side door. That is, until I looked up and saw the fire police draw their pistols and aim them at the patient, oh yeah, and the oxygen tank, size M, behind him. And me. Did I mention the ambulance was still running? So I nearly shit my pants as I fell out the side of the ambulance. My partner was back on her feet and couldn't see what was going on, but I spear tackled her to get her away of what could have been, granted, in the absolute worst case scenario, a goddamn explosion. She screams at the fire police not to shoot. They yell at me to kill the engine. I yell at them not to shoot while I kill the engine. The patient is fucking yelling at everything. I run to the front and reach in, kill the engine and grab the keys, and hightail it. Now at least the fucker can't drive away in an ambulance. My partner and I watch from the sidewalk as two fire police point guns at an M-tank behind a drunk and yell into their radios. She pulls out the portable radio and yells for police, supervisors, fire, anybody. I look up in time to see a smaller, portable oxygen tank go flying out of the back door of the ambulance. The fire police dodge it. Then various other this and that's come flying out. Dudes trashing the inside of our rig like the fucking Hulk. Fire police still won't shoot at him because of the whole oxygen tank hostage scenario. So, what could be scarier, you ask? Next we hear both fire police yell, "No, no, no, no," and start bolting. There's a smashing sound and the two of them turn around, much farther down the street. Sure enough, the patient emerges from the back of the ambulance *** holding the M-tank. Now he's not just hiding in front of or behind the big fucking oxygen tank. Knowing the fire police wouldn't be likely to shoot at him if he's holding it. Suicidal fuck. He eyes them. Then he eyes my partner and he must have decided that the two without guns would be easier to go after, so he starts coming toward us, holding the oxygen tank like a big club. The fire police start yelling louder, trying to draw him from us, when we hear the blessed sound of a fire truck roaring down the street. The fire truck doesn't even come to a stop before half a dozen firemen jump off, Halligan bars in hand, and surround the guy. He's got a fucking crazy look in his eye as he grips the oxygen tank and swirls around like a dog. The fire police come running up and the fire truck operators jump out, and as he starts to realize he's now outnumbered 12 to 1. If you include me and my partner, by far the smallest and least threatening of the group, and he slowly puts the M-tank down. The firefighters tackle him en masse and he ends up getting cuffed. The fire police wait for some more police to show up before they take him away. Yeah, seeing that human wrecking ball stalk toward me in the middle of the night, wielding a giant oxygen tank as a club, I imagine that something like a +4 to hit, +10 damage, was absolutely the scariest thing that happened to me. Coupled with the fact that if the fire police shot him to try to save me, there was a chance that would have actually endangered me more. See, explosion. TL. Dr. Oxygen tank used as suicide bomber body armor and weapon by massive drunk firestarter. My uncle owns a large 100+ acre farm in NC which I would go to during summer vacation to spend time with my cousins. One year, in the late 80s when I was about 7 or 8, my brother and I woke up for some reason and couldn't fall back asleep, so we hung out talking and looking out the second-story window over at the large old farmhouse about 30 yards away. The old farmhouse, which was built in the 1880s, had been sitting empty for decades. If there was ever a stereotypical scary old house, this was the house. So, as my brother and I are surveying the farm, shooting the shit, we look into the southwest corner window on the second floor and see a blue, gray, glowing person, staring at us. Clear as day. We proceed to freak out, wake up my dad, alert him to glowing person, only for it to be gone when he comes into our room. Fast forward 8 years, I'm 16 years old, visiting the farm again. For some reason or other my aunt and uncle had to take my cousins to something and gave me the option of going with or staying back on the farm. Sensing my first free time in weeks, I pounce on the opportunity to be left alone. The day was really overcast, so I didn't want to venture too far away with the prospect of rain hanging over my head, so I wandered down the yard to the trampoline positioned a few yards from the old farmhouse. I commenced to jumping and flipping for about 10 minutes until I feel this glare on my neck which seemed to paralyze me instantly, and in that instant the memory of that night 8 years earlier came flooding back. I turned my head, looked at the southwest second-story window, and there it was. Same ominous glow, same outfit, same stare. I turned away from the window and somehow managed to continue to jump, all the while the glare felt like a hand on my shoulder. After another minute or two I turned back to see the glowing person had not wavered. At this point I lost my cool and ran as fast as I possibly could into my cousin's room, shut the blinds and had a heart attack until they got home. Fuck that shit. I have a 3-way tie, not sure which one would be considered the scariest, so I'll let you decide. Asterisk. When I was a teenager I went to a small amusement park on the boardwalk in Ocean City, MD. The small roller coaster there worked by backing up a huge incline, going through a loop and another incline, then going backwards through the same loop to where it started. My bar didn't lock and I didn't realize it until the ride had started. I was screaming bloody murder for them to stop the ride all the way as it backed up the incline, and had the rest of the riders screaming for me too when they found out what was going on. I thought for sure I was done for when the roller coaster started moving, but they put on the brakes where it started, let everyone off, and shut down the ride. Asterisk. I was also carjacked at gunpoint outside of my first crappy apartment when I was in college. I was only a half-mile from home in a bad neighborhood when someone walked down the crosswalk and just opened my door and shoved a gun in my mouth, breaking my teeth. He told me to empty my pockets and get out of the car. I did as he told me, and it turns out he did all this right in front of a police officer in the gas station right next to the light where I was carjacked. He was arrested but skipped bail before I was supposed to identify him in court, and I haven't heard anything else about it since. Asterisk. The last one doesn't really have much of a story. Towards the end of high school I worked for the Department of Rec and Parks, setting up sports fields, putting down bases, chalk lining, etc. For obvious reasons the games would get cancelled in a thunderstorm, but if I had set everything up I was still responsible for putting everything away before I could leave. Well, I put everything away and there was a flag pole right by the storage shed. It was struck with lightning while I was no more than 30 or so feet away. I could feel the electricity run up through my body from the ground and I couldn't see afterward. I was really frightened it had done something to my eyes, but it turns out the electricity just warped my contacts. I saw the optometrist and he said I was lucky the contacts didn't fuse to my eye, which is apparently a common occurrence when people wearing them are electrocuted. The setup on this one is a little long, so bear with me. I was a park ranger in NYC and was the supervisor of an endangered species nesting area in Rockaway Beach, Queens, NYC. The two species we were monitoring were piping plovers and least terns. The nesting area was about a mile long, give or take, and extended from the boardwalk to the shoreline. There was a sand dune about 50 yards from the boardwalk that blocked the view of the shoreline. There were 2 other supervisors on my staff and 8 seasonal workers that were from the surrounding neighborhood, which was mostly projects. I really liked my staff. Most of them were hard workers and came back year after year and really cared about the birds, but every year there was someone who was just impossible to work with and created all sorts of drama. This drama usually centered around them not doing their job, calling in sick twice a week, and running their mouth nonstop about the supervisors and staff. So, needless to say, every year, the staff and the supervisors would all be sick of this person and would come to the conclusion that we would be better off without them, even if that meant we all had to pick up the slack for them, which we were usually doing anyways. This particular person had only worked 3 of 5 days a week for 3 weeks in a row. She was complaining that her Parks Department issued beach umbrella was broken, and that she deserved to have one like everyone else. In hindsight, it probably wasn't the best thing to say, but I told her, "I'll get you a new umbrella when you decide to work 5 days a week like the rest of us." She broke down and had a fit, telling me she couldn't work now because I made her so upset. I told her if she went home she wouldn't have a job when she came back. I was sick of her nonsense. This was pretty much in front of the entire staff. She went to her post and I didn't hear from her for the rest of the day. We were having an absolutely terrible year with the birds that summer. Rockaway Beach is filthy and full of trash. Gulls flocked to the beach by the thousands in the summer to feast on the discarded food of beach patrons. When they weren't eating trash, they were eating piping plover chicks. We had 0 chicks survive up to this point, so we had little to be happy about that summer. We didn't need all this drama added on. I was off the next 2 days, but I got a phone call from the other 2 supervisors. They had a run-in with that problem employee's boyfriend, who just so happened to be a blood that just got released from jail. For anyone who hasn't been there, Rockaway Beach is like a DMZ filled with projects and dotted with million-dollar beachfront condos. There is a lot of crime and gang violence. Gang fights would regularly spill onto the beach. That is probably why we had an endangered species nesting site on that beach, because no sane person would ride the A train for 2 hours to go to the worst beach in the city. This angry blood felon told my coworkers that if he ever found me he'd kill me. He went on a rant about how I disrespected his woman and that I should watch myself. He knew where I liked to eat lunch every day, where I parked my car, my monitoring routines, he knew everything. He also warned that I better not fire his girlfriend or he'd be coming after me. He'd find me in the middle of the nesting site, shoot me 1/2 a mile from help and out of sight from the boardwalk and leave me to die. The next day I came into work in my bulletproof vest, filed a police report, fired that worthless woman who didn't know a piping plover from a bald eagle, and spent the rest of my summer in the pickup truck. I hardly did any monitoring of the birds the rest of the summer, and it showed at the end of the season when I had no piping plovers to show for. Luckily, the terns nested on the boardwalk side of the dune, and they had a great season. The worst part was I had no idea what this guy looked like. I only had a name and a description from the other supervisors. I started parking my car in a different spot and drove to the opposite end of the beach for lunch every day. I asked my staff if I should be worried, and they all agreed that I probably shouldn't be anywhere by myself. People got killed in Rockaway every week. I'd hear the gunshots. This was the summer where I redefined paranoia. I wasn't armed. I only had pepper spray and a baton. I was issued a bulletproof vest, which I started wearing despite the 100-degree heat every day. TLDR. I reprimanded a terrible employee and her blood, felon, thug boyfriend laid out a detailed plan to murder me to my other coworkers.